Hello and welcome to the first in a series of sort of video podcasts, which we're doing here at Block. My name is Matthew Mahoney. I'm Director of Digital Transformation here at Block, and I'm joined by Adam Casey. So, Adam, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself?
Morning, Adam Casey. So lead the cybersecurity consultancy practice here at Block. Good to meet you.
And as it may be no surprise, we are here to talk about cybersecurity, aren't we, Adam? So, we're just going to run through some of the kind of like challenges that I think that we've seen in the industry, and some of the changes that we've seen, and talk about some of the services that we've got here at Block that can support that. So, Adam, I know you've got a burning question for me. Do you want to ask away?
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose one of the things we always get faced with is what is cybersecurity and what does it mean? But keen to get your thoughts on that, Matt. What does cybersecurity mean to you? What experience or challenges have you faced with it?
So I think I'm not going to give my age away, but I've been around a while, and certainly what I've seen is that cybersecurity has become more and more relevant when working in technology. So I would say probably a good few years ago, when I worked in healthcare, we recognised the importance of having a cybersecurity team and having a resource pool on site. But it was very much a kind of a technical response to the challenge, and I think as we've probably moved away from it. That was around the time of WannaCry, which I imagine was quite a big catalyst for a lot of organisations. But as we've moved away from that timeline to 2017, over the last 5 years, what I've seen is the importance of cybersecurity as an organisational position, and the need to have the appropriate governance frameworks in place, to have the kind of corporate understanding of the risks and the legislation and the responsibilities that the organisation has. It's been a real drive over the last few years, and I think that's an area where, certainly in my experience, a lot of organisations probably, I wouldn't say are on the back foot, but maybe need a bit of support in getting over the line, and perhaps need some expert guidance on what their obligations are, and really how to make sure they've got a good cyber resilience strategy, how to make sure their cyber posture is appropriate, and how to make sure that, and again, depending on the kind of organisation, but having come from a healthcare background, really looking at their positioning against legislation such as GDPR and NIS, and thinking about, in certain cases, certainly again in England, healthcare, and in Wales, where I'm from, you've got DSPT, and you've got the NIS-CAF as well, which you need to really be working towards compliance for. So big challenge. I think the last couple of years, and we're still talking about the pandemic, and I'm sure that'll at some point get a bit tiresome for people, but there's been a huge digital transformation over the last few years, or the last 2 or 3 years, I should say. And what we've seen is an explosion in the kind of, the organisational boundary. Really, it doesn't really exist anymore, as we've moved very heavily towards hybrid working. Even in healthcare, there's a fair proportion of the staff are really, administrative and clerical, if you will, as opposed to clinical, and therefore they can work in a hybrid way. And there's a whole range of staff who have always worked in the community setting anyway. Therefore, that kind of hybrid, agile way of working is really relevant to them. But we are seeing more and more the need to protect data, applications, and information, as opposed to the kind of traditional protect the boundary of an organisation with firewalls and really drawing at the drawbridge when you need to. The other thing that I think is really important is just the explosion in these digital services and the number of devices that you're now responsible for. And again, speaking from personal experience, you've got this whole kind of like Internet of Things, Internet of Medical Things. You've got building management systems. You've got nurse call systems. They are all now IP based, and they were all becoming a major concern for me when I was at healthcare, just because we've suddenly got these unmanaged devices. They're unknown things. The traditional view of, we've got our AV sorted, we're patched and up to date, we're happy. You've suddenly got a load of stuff you're not in control of necessarily. And it's how do you deal with those, and how do you give, very importantly, the organisation good assurance and good risk management to demonstrate that you're on top of your assets, you're on top of your information, and you know what your risks are. And I suppose you're progressing to a place where you're secure, if you will.
No, definitely, that pretty much was spot on. It's exactly what it is. It's the threats we've got now. Cybersecurity has become a business function. It's a business enabler function. How do you keep the business running? But breaking it down to something really simple, it is protecting information, protecting data, protecting assets. But we look at three things when we look at protection. So it's confidentiality, just making sure that the data is only accessed by authorized people. We've got the integrity, just making sure the data is true, correct, it's not been corrupted or changed. And then availability, making sure it's there when you actually need it to do the business function. So just pulling on your experience within healthcare, what do you think the impact could be of a cyber event within a healthcare organization?
So I think, often when trying to sort of illustrate the concerns and the risks around cyber events and cybersecurity, there are two things that really spring to mind, or maybe three, I should say. Disruption to services. That's really, really fundamental. You've got a risk to continuity of service, and you can have that through a component failure as well. But there are incidences that we've seen in the press very, very recently in Northern Ireland and in the UK, where there's been significant disruption to clinical care caused by cyber events and cybersecurity breaches. One of the things that is really valuable is information about people. So medical record information is very, very valuable on the sort of is it the Silk Road or whatever it's called, the sort of black market. This kind of data is really, really, key to hackers. It's valuable to them. It's stuff that they want to sell. And you've got the risk of ransomware. So just the disruption from that, the corruption of data, you could maybe potentially lose data forever, which is very, very detrimental to healthcare. As you might imagine, you need to make sure that this information is accurate, it's correct, and it's available to deliver the best care and to help caregivers really make the right decisions about care and clinical pathways. And I mean, ultimately, it's important. It's not as important as the impact on clinical care, but you've got to be thinking about the risk of legislative penalties from the ICO or the competent authority, depending on where you are. And you've got these quite significant fines that can come under GDPR and the NIS directive. So I think there's a lot of impact from cybersecurity that can happen at the moment, and it can be very, very disruptive to care. I think that the key here is really to make sure the organization understands those risks and what its obligations are from that perspective as well, so that there's a role for an IT department, which is where I would have worked as a CTO, to kind of communicate the risks. But it's an organizational problem. I've got to keep coming back to that point, and I think that's where we're almost in that position where you think about the classic analogy of I think it was JFK asking the cleaner or something, where what was he doing at NASA when he's like sweeping up and he's like, I'm helping put people on the moon. And to be honest with you, it'd be great to think that if you asked somebody in any organization what their role was in preventing cybersecurity threats, they would understand that. I think we need to get to that kind of position, and that's quite a journey, I think, for a lot of organisations at the moment.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree with you there. There's a severe shortage of cyber professionals as well. COVID probably didn't help that. We already had a shortage of people within the UK, but now it's work from anywhere, not just work from home. We're now accessing a global market, so I think there's predicted to be a 5 million shortage of cyber professionals by 2025. So we need to work smarter, not harder, and I think that's where more technology is coming in, automation, but it brings more issues. So what's changed in the industry at the moment is we've obviously had Russia, Ukraine that's come in. So the threats, we've always had foreign intelligence and state nation threats. China's been kind of in the shadows over the past while, but they are there. They're probably leaders in ransomware. But off the back of Russia and Ukraine, there's active intelligence being targeted against the UK. But actually, there's now hacktivist groups targeting UK systems, which are then used to go against Russia. So we found ourselves where we're a little bit piggy in the middle at the moment. So the threats are going through the roof. there's more complex systems. There's artificial intelligence and machine learning, so attacks are getting more sophisticated. We're more reliant on automated systems, so when they go wrong, we don't necessarily know how to react or how to respond. We don't know what decisions the systems are making. But one of the biggest things for me is the organized crime gang, organized crime industry is valued at currently just over $2 trillion. But by 2025, it's predicted to reach almost $10 trillion. So the next 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So the next 3 years, there's going to be almost a fourfold in the value of cyber crime, and that's obviously going to hit us. But with a shortage of resources, we need to look at how we deal with that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges, particularly again, in the NHS. The explosion in demand that we've seen over the last sort of few years has meant it's very, very difficult to recruit the resources, and I think there are some difficulties for NHS people to really attract the right kind of skills and resources that they probably need nowadays, particularly given some of the sort of constraints on pay that you have in the NHS and Agenda for Change versus market rate for some of these types of resources. But I think fundamentally, there's probably just a bit of a gap, as you said, with the amount of resource that's available at the moment in the UK, and the demand for that resource. So that, back to the classic supply demand sort of analogy, you're pushing the market rate up, and that makes it more and more challenging. So I suppose, if I was back in healthcare, whilst we did have a good technical team on site who would be looking at patch compliance and monitoring firewalls and doing threat assessments, that kind of thing, the kind of resources that we would need to get the governance stuff up and running and provide kind of like ad hoc strategic views or ad hoc consultancy, I think I'd have to be looking at bringing in that kind of skill set on a kind of hired approach as and when I needed it, because I would just struggle to recruit somebody who had that kind of capability. So it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think the other bit to think about is, I guess we've got kind of a global market nowadays, haven't we? So we could conceivably have people, depending on time of day, obviously, working from anywhere in the world, and that presents a challenge. I think here at Block, we work almost exclusively with the NHS. So we've got a long history of about 16 or so years working with NHS customers. We've built the business up around the NHS. I would say something like 95% of our customers are NHS now. And we've, as an organisation, seen that transition that I sort of described at the start, working through the NHS, and we've come up with a range of services, I suppose, that we believe can help and can provide the kind of assurances that I personally feel that healthcare and other types of organisations need when thinking about their cyber posture and their cyber strategy. So, Adam, do you want to maybe talk about some of the services that we offer here?
Yeah, definitely. So we've got a whole range of services, but one of the key things we do offer is, you've seen that there's a shortage of professionals. It's difficult for NHS organisations to pay the right salaries or retain, so attrition is quite high. So I am seeing that it's in a gap in having that industry expertise within NHS organisations. So most trusts or areas we work with, just having that clear strategy and direction, convincing the board, the senior leadership team, of what to do and how to do it. So one of the most important services, I think, at the moment is that strategic advisory direction, chief information security officer service. Just giving them the industry expertise, people who have worked across not just the NHS but other regulated areas like defence, finance on the private sector, but bringing those industry insights to work with the senior leadership team to work out what's their strategy, how are they going to get the most or the best investment out of the technology, the direction, the frameworks they need to align to, So I'd say one of the core services is that strategic leadership and CISO advisory. But then following that, setting the direction and the strategy and the framework you want to align to is key. But no one organisation is the same. So we've got different threats, we've got different jurisdictions, we've got size of volume, different technology stacks. So being able to give a tailored outcome or tailored service to the NHS is quite vital. So you might get an area that just needs hands, resources, security managers, architects. They might need help with penetration testing. They might need help with implementing new solutions or moving to the cloud. So what we really do is knit individual services together to give that tailored outcome to the customers, and that could be a varied range of things.
Excuse me, sorry about that. So yeah, I think the sort of like exec level awareness role is a very, very important one. In my experience, there's a lot of people out there who are at that kind of like director of digital level now. Maybe in some organisations they even sit on the executive team, and I've seen that transition go from where, like the ICT/informatics department is maybe at that kind of assistant director level to maybe there's a CDO to then maybe, some organisations got somebody actually on the executive team. But, I'll come back to that point I made earlier on about being around for a while and seeing it emerge and grow as I've been in the industry. And genuinely, I don't feel I personally would have the skills to represent cybersecurity in the way that it needs to be represented if I was in that director role. I think that's where, the kind of CISO service really, really helps. And there are people out there who can do that, but they are expensive, aren't they? Let's be honest. They are definitely well up on the sort of six-figure salaries, generally speaking, I would say. So having that kind of consultative capacity where you can draw on a resource to give advice as and when you need it, I think that's something that works really, really well, and is an approach that I would imagine most people in positions like I've been in would take. Have you got examples where we've sort of provided that kind of service?
Yeah, definitely. So I think just coming back, so a CISO can be a named role within the business, so someone who's accountable, but that's not always needed. Sometimes it's just that voice of conscience, someone to check in to say, is this the right thing? Help them translate or demystify the technical or the cyber jargon into a language that the business can understand. So yeah, we currently deliver a number of virtual CISO posts to different NHS trusts, but equally we've also done strategic advisory in CISO with other regulated businesses like MOD. We do it across private medical healthcare. We do it with nuclear. We've got we also work in some private sector. We've got fintech and other regulated businesses like that. So areas working with cutting edge technology, all the way down to the really highly regulated MOD nuclear, where there's no innovation, technology and threat, risk appetite is really low. But what I find is bringing the varied customer experiences to the NHS is quite vital. But ultimately, it's about how do you enable the business move forward? How do you do more with less? And instead of hiring or having someone permanently in post, which is costing money, it's about bringing those skills and resources just exactly when you need it. So not having a permanent person in post. It could be just having a few days a month, someone you can call upon to give you that advice when you really need it.
And in terms of outcomes, then, the organisation's getting the kind of capability that it needs to really, meet its legislative requirements and to put itself in a position where it is as secure as it can be with the right kind of advice. But it's doing it in a way that represents value for money, because the organisation has to sort of focus on that as well, because working in the NHS, as we all know, can be quite cost prohibitive at times, and it's often a blended approach to get the right balance of resources to deliver the outcomes that you're looking for. So you've talked about a couple of other things in that narrative there. I mean, I think you've alluded to the fact that there's a kind of cybersecurity consultancy kind of capability as well. So can you maybe talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so consultancy or the professional services arm. I mean, we have cyber's like building a house. It's quite big when you break it down. But when you build a house, you don't expect one person to be able to build it for you. You'll have your architect, you've got your plumber, your electrician, your bricklayer, etc. Cybersecurity is a little bit like that. We've got different domains. So breaking down the domains, we've got governance, risk and compliance. So looking at the frameworks, and that could be someone who's a security manager who actually drives through, implements, monitors and maintains cybersecurity within the business. So not quite the strategic level of a CISO, but someone who would do the doing, rolls the sleeves up and gets stuck in. Then we look at the more technical side. So it could be penetration testing, testing infrastructure applications to see where the vulnerabilities are before any systems go live or as part of the annual assessment. We've also got architecture. So you might be building or implement a new solution or system, and you just need someone to give that actual assurance review. Is it the right thing? Have you got the right controls in place? And then all the way down to resilience, so business continuity, looking at testing systems, looking at the incident response, preparing for incidents, and then actually helping if something does go wrong. So there's quite a few areas in there that we give, and we bring the individual skills behind us. So whether it's a business continuity expert, a governance expert, a technical pen tester or architect, the best we can bring the skills behind, rather than an organization having to recruit these individual skills, which don't normally translate. You normally sit within one parameter, but to build a full security team and hold that within the NHS is very expensive. And like I said, it's difficult to retain them as well, with salaries going up at the rate they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, personally, I've seen that where we've brought in a sort of team of 5 kind of technical cyber type people, and I would say we've probably seen most of those move on in the time that I was there, and great, it's brilliant for them. Just causes some recruitment headaches internally. One of the things that I think is quite interesting, you sort of mentioned the range of the services there. So, we do have essentially the right kind of resources and, to be commercial about it, the right day rates for the different types of resources we've got. So it's not always your top end kind of VC, so strategic engineer resource. We literally do get down to that. If you need a pair of hands to help you work through some cyber kind of like officer kind of level work, we've got that kind of capability. We've got those resources that we can make available to you. And some of the stuff you said there, I think there's areas where I was quite lucky working in NHS Wales. It was quite a good community of practice and quite a good governance. And there were some very strong cyber people in Wales. I won't name them or embarrass them, but there's some really good people there and a really good community of practice. But some of the areas where I think that I would have benefited from help would have been like writing incident response plans, thinking about what is the communication pathway throughout the organization, what is the appropriate way to really handle things, and how do we move through an incident, what's the kind of communication that we need to give. And certainly there were good plans in place for your more generic incident types, and there were really good processes in place for how those were handled across the health board. But I think cyber's a little bit different, isn't it? Because it's much faster moving, and that's what worries me. If you've got an outage or an incident or a power failure or UPS is gone, you kind of know what to do about those. But I think cyber is one of those situations where it's a bit of an unknown, because if you've had a cyber attack, it's probably a kind of day zero thing rather than something that's kind of like old hat, and people don't necessarily know how to respond to it. And I think that's one of the areas that caused me a bit of concern. I think that, being able to have that sort of incident response and understand how to work through it would be really, really useful.
Oh, yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, first thing is about knowing what you've got, wherever it is, and having that protective monitoring in place. So looking at managed detection response or security operations center, receiving the logs and alerts. But often I find it's quite simpler than that within businesses. Most cyber frameworks, well, in fact, every cyber framework that I've ever worked with, they deal with incident response. But you'd be surprised at the amount of organizations that don't have the documented policies, processes, or they don't even test it. So just going through that regular testing to see, well, if this scenario, which is likely against my organization, happens, who's involved? How do we get hold of them? What happens if they're not there? Who's the backup? What happens if this goes down? How do we get it? What's the order? And often I also find where they do the testing, they always look at getting back to 100%. I mean, for a major cyber incident, you're not going to be up at 100% the next day. It could take you weeks to get back up to operational. So what's the good enough? What are your backup processes? Can you do things manually for a time? Just having those documented processes in place, but also doing the regular testing, but mainly learning from those things and improving your processes. But we do still find a lot of organizations just don't do the basics, never mind having all the technical systems and controls in place to be able to react to detect or block. And if you look at the current threats we face, I mean, you mentioned WannaCry back in 2017. The NHS wasn't the intended target there. It was Russia against Ukraine. It just so happened that the NHS was using the very similar systems to Ukraine. So, and a cyber attack just doesn't stay on one area or one jurisdiction. It does spread. So, we won't be able to defend against state nation sponsored attacks, but equally, you've got people sat within their bedrooms running videos on YouTube, testing it. And if you're not doing the basic things, you can be taken down by someone without any sophistication or motivation. So it's about understanding what you've got, where it is, have we got the right controls? And unfortunately, the only way you're going to do that is by having someone who knows what they're doing and testing, keeping you right.
I think that's really important. So one of the things that was often at the forefront of my mind was the kind of the risk assurance, the auditing, the frameworks, business continuity planning, as you've mentioned, and making sure that we could, one, that we had the processes in place. Obviously, we can help with the creation of those processes and policies as well, and also then making sure that the evidence and assurance framework is in place to demonstrate that you do your business continuity planning and testing. Yeah. I think that in healthcare, it would have been really useful to have rehearsals, as you've mentioned, and to get the right people on board and to work through those kind of like back to the incident plan again. We can help with that. We can help with the kind of conversations that need to take place at that very senior level. And those sort of two positions were very much kind of like, a large part of my job was kind of risk management, assurance frameworks, evidencing that we were really running the services safely and effectively, and compliance obviously is a key thing to that as well. I think one of the areas that was a bit of a challenge for us was, probably a couple actually. You mentioned penetration testing earlier on, and I guess people perhaps tend to think of penetration as quite a technical thing, that you might think about an application or a website or a service that you need to try and breach. But there's other aspects to that, aren't there? Which I think, again, you guys, the cyber guys can help with. And I'm going to bring in my second point there, because I think it's all sort of relevant, is supply chain management as well. So when you're thinking about assurance of a system, it's great that you're doing everything perfectly, but what about the guys you're buying the web service off, or you're getting the application from? You've got a VPN tunnel into your network which is insecure or something, and they're not patching to the latest standards. So maybe have a bit of a debate about those two things, if we could, before we finish.
Yeah, definitely. so the NCSC, so the National Cybersecurity Centre, have announced that the number one threat to UK business is through the supply chain. So an organisation like the NHS, which does have a budget, they will invest in technology, consultancy, advice. They'll typically have the controls in place. However, the suppliers that might be providing one piece of software or service could be a very small business with absolutely zero security. So attackers go for the most easiest route to compromise. So if the intended target was MOD as an example. They probably wouldn't be successful by attacking the MOD direct. They would go through the supply chain, who don't have any controls and have the routes into the MOD systems, or by putting personnel within. So supply chain remains the most likely route of compromise. But what is important with the supply chain at the moment, it's actually through software development, it's through applications. So it's, I mean, with software development now, it's don't reinvent the wheel, it's reuse. So use open source tools, open source code repositories. We're starting to see some really sophisticated attacks now with legitimate business applications being used by businesses, but those applications being compromised within the supply chain or development lifecycle within those suppliers. And we saw a really sophisticated one last year with SolarWinds, which was used by most organizations, enterprise organizations around the world. Their legitimate service was compromised in the development lifecycle, and then when it went into production or used, it gave a back route. So supply chain is definitely the number one threat. Application, so software developers using vulnerable open source repositories of code, downloading developer tools which are compromised within the business is a likely route in. So when we do, just coming back to your first point around penetration testing, penetration testing is normally at the end of something. So when you've developed something, and that could be an application, or you've developed a new system, network, infrastructure, that's when you normally do the final penetration test. But what we want to look at for security is shift left. How do we embed secure by design from the beginning? So rather than it being a bolt-on where you've then got to go retrofit, which is expensive, you've got to build it at the beginning. So define the requirements, put the we do automated security scanning. So if you are developing something, almost like a spell checker, as you're developing, as you're writing something on a Word document, there's tools now which tell you if you're developing something which is vulnerable as the developers creating it. So when we look at security, we want to do a shift left approach as much as possible, because it's going to save you time, it's going to save you money, rather than wait until right at the end. You're either realizing there's holes in something you're going to put on the network, or it's already on the network, which we typically see, and it is vulnerable. But penetration testing doesn't just include the technical side either. It can also be the physical side. So we can look at social engineering. We can look at the building. So physically going out and testing the premises to see if we've got an objective to get into a data center, comms room, access to material. So it could be that physical human side as well as the actual technical vulnerability side.
I think there's, we start thinking about NIS, there are other risks than just cyber vulnerability, if we think about it. So I was talking to a colleague a couple of days ago, and he was telling me about a funny event that sounds funny in hindsight, but at the time must have been dreadful, but where an engineer had been told to go and tidy up the server room, sort of thing, and then they'd gone in and started unplugging all these cables one by one, and the excuse was given that the engineer had fallen into the switch, and then the person from the service receiving organisation said, but he seemed to fall quite sequentially into it, i.e. the ports were going down one by one, So I think that, there's some stuff there where you've got to think about, change control assurances and protection from an availability perspective, coming back to confidentiality, integrity and availability as well. So there's a lot that we can do there, I think, isn't it? We've got, as you said, I think there's two angles to this. One is the kind of like the day-to-day practice. So we can help with the setup of security scanning and the kind of day-to-day or week-to-week, depending on how you look at it, vulnerability assessments on the infrastructure that lead to continual improvement of security posture. But we can also come in with those kind of point-in-time assessments where we're effectively really assuring that those, day-to-day, week-to-week processes are effective. And I think that's really, really valuable. The other bit that I like is, again, we can help with the kind of, the setup of phishing campaigns, and that's got to be regular. You can't do that once every 6 months, every now and then. You've got to get into a position where you're testing regularly and you're making sure the organization is, I suppose, educated to not be clicking on these links. And I had one the other day on my personal email, and it was so convincing. I was impressed. I really was. And I knew not to click on it, but I was impressed. It was so good. And you think about people who haven't got the kind of careers that we've got, would very easily click on that thinking it was legitimate. And I've heard stories where CDIOs, CTOs have clicked on internal phishing links. It wasn't me. And it's difficult sometimes. I think there's a lot that can be done, a lot of organizational awareness. And again, we're here to help with those kind of services, to help you get those up and running. And really, it's a bit of a skills transfer piece, isn't there, where there's something you maybe haven't done before, and there's no reason that you should have necessarily, but it's stuff that you need to start thinking about doing now. We're here, we can help with that, either through cyber consultancy services or the penetration testing services. That's what it's about, really. I think is just getting organizations to a place where they are at a good level of cyber compliance, have a good cybersecurity posture, that they've got good organizational understanding of the challenges that are now facing them. And kind of back to the point, I wasn't intentional I'm going to make this point, but it actually supports people in their private lives, doesn't it, as well? That awareness and that knowledge that they learn through good cybersecurity practice and posture at work, they take home, and then they don't click on that link about their Amazon Prime account being suspended, and they don't lose money out of their bank account because they've learned some stuff at work that actually takes, they can take home with them as well. So
definitely.
So I think that's been a really, really good sort of discussion. I guess there's probably something else in there that we haven't talked about, which is and I'll try and get the acronym right, which is secure software development lifecycle. And I know there's a number of organisations that do software development. I think we haven't got much time left, but maybe quickly, just sort of, and I think you said it already, the importance of designing right from the start. And I will just say that, having worked in IT for as long as I have, there's this real desire, I think, from techies to go and solutionize and not start with design. But I think that's where, again, security has now got to become part of the design, isn't it? So perhaps maybe give us a minute or two on that, Adam.
Yeah, definitely. I think people think that security or cyber security is all about technology, and it isn't. Most of it is around culture, people and processes. So touched on it earlier, but the whole point of most businesses are doing some form of development, application development. Building it so it's invisible is the way to do it. Making security autonomous and invisible and easy is the way to do good security. So what we look at is that shift left approach. I've never worked with a development team that don't want to that wanted to put out a vulnerable or bad piece of software. They just don't want to. So what we've got is a list of non-functional requirements. So it's things that software developers need to embed within the application itself. So develop it within the application to allow them to become compliant with regulation or build a secure app. So first of all, making them aware of the things they've got to put in. But when we look at secure development practices, we have automated security scanning tools like static analysis, dynamic analysis, and we've got software composition analysis, which looks at third-party code. So it's as they're developing the code, it's embedded and it's picking up the vulnerabilities and the issues within the life cycle. But when we look at a secure development framework or methodology, most of it, I mean, the first practice is train your staff. That's not technical. It's the second thing is around understanding the requirements, doing a bit of threat modeling, but all the way through to automate security scanning tools and then into incident response. But I find that with most security, it's not about technology. Technology is one of the controls or one of the things at the end. Most of it is about culture, awareness. Coming back to the phishing issue, no matter how good the organization is, the attacks are so sophisticated. they will get someone to click on a link, but it only takes one person to click on a link, and a network can be compromised. But the way we combat that is through training and culture awareness. And you're right, translating that from a business perspective to your home life, because if you can protect yourself, you'll take that into work. But it's all about the people, the processes, and the technology is there as a catch-all at the end.
There's that classic saying, isn't there? There are two types of organisations: those that have been hacked and those who don't know they've been hacked. It's something like that, isn't it? I guess, you know, we're going to have to draw it to a close here. It's been fascinating talking to you. Where do you see the NHS requirements going, sort of moving forwards?
Yeah, of course. So this is a good point. So we're supporting a number of trusts now from a strategic and transformation perspective. But there's new frameworks that are coming out. So the government cybersecurity strategy 2022 to 2030 is being released. And what they've said is the framework across NIS, regulated businesses, and government businesses is to align to something called the NCSC Cyber Assessment Framework. So we've already started to see the NCSC CAF be pushed out across central government, other public sector areas. So from an NHS perspective, the NCSC CAF framework is one that needs to be adopted. There's where I think the NHS needs help is help with that strategy. What's the direction? Where are they in terms of physical health, cyber hygiene? So doing the assessment against the right frameworks as part of your strategy is a good baseline. Understand the gaps. But areas of immaturity I'm seeing at the moment, it's not actually looking at the new technology. It's putting the baseline, the basic things in place. But things like protective monitoring, looking at using new technology as opposed to bolting on to old technology. You might as well look at investing your money in something where security is being built in, rather than using old stuff where we're having to put sticky plasters to try and keep things secure. But just having that strategy in place, aligned to the right frameworks, where you know where the gaps are, but you cannot fix everything. So what you need to do is focus on the things that you really need to fix. And that's where I think the NCSC CAF comes in, because it helps you identify what's critical to your business, and you apply the controls at the critical system level, rather than typical old school frameworks where you try to build it across the entire organization. It's about prioritizing your spend, prioritizing your resource and efforts on the things that you really need to keep your business going. So that's where I think we're going to see change.
And the NISCAF, that evolves, doesn't it? It doesn't sit still. It changes with every year or so, I guess. And you know, it's evolving as the threat landscape is evolving and as technology is changing. And you know, I think it's a great piece of work. So I guess, I mean, we've talked very much about the kind of consulting, kind of governance stuff. Short plug, really, I suppose, is that, you know, whilst we've got this great consulting capability here at Block now, we've got a really, really strong team behind us who can deliver the kind of services we described to you. We can also do the technical stuff as well. So, you know, your classic firewalls, you know, we've got a sort of managed detection and response service and a SOC service, which, you know, really, really happy to talk about if anyone wants to get in touch with their account manager or myself. And we also do very much focus on that kind of move towards zero trust networking. So segmentation, which I know is a big agenda that's come out from NHS England recently, and network access control and identity services engine kind of approach as well. So we can do all the technical stuff too. We're very experienced at doing that. I've got a couple of webinars. If you have a look on LinkedIn, you'll find them where we've gone through the kind of approach that you can implement. You know, segmentation, NAC, and identity services engine as well in networking. So, I mean, Adam, it's been brilliant talking to you today. I think we've done done a great job, had a really good conversation. I just want to clear things up. That was a San Miguel glass with a Barocca inside it. It wasn't the San Miguel.
I did wonder.
Seriously, if anyone would like to know more, please contact their account manager or even email me directly on mmahoney@block.co.uk. We'd be really happy to have, just an open discussion and talk more about this stuff. We're really passionate about it, and just to see if there's anywhere we can help. So thank you, Adam.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Matt.